Hello, I'm Sarah Zaman. Welcome to Thinking Forward, a Voice of America town hall that's a discussion with young international leaders. Now, you and I might be getting older with every passing minute, but our world is getting younger. Right now, more than half of the world's population is less than 30 years old. And there are more young people on this planet than ever before. Now, this can be a great opportunity, a great asset if the potential of millions of these young people is utilized. If not, it could lead to increased instability, violence, and mass migration. And the effects of that will be felt around the globe. As the UN marks International Youth Day on August 12th, we at Voice of America have gathered some young leaders from Asia and Africa, two continents with most of the world's young population. And we want to find out what kind of a future they see when they think forward about some of the most pressing challenges facing young people today, like limited employment opportunities, an increased risk of exploitation by extremist groups, and also a lack of voice in the political arena. And throughout this next 1 hour, we'll also hear from our live audience, but most importantly, I want to hear from you, Voice of America's viewers and listeners spread around the world. So join the conversation at facebook.com/Voice of America, or you can tweet your thoughts at VOA News using the hashtag VOA Think Forward. And now let's meet our panel. Joining us in New York is Ndaba Mandela, the grandson of late South African leader Nelson Mandela. Ndaba is a UNAID ambassador and the author of the recently released book, Going to the Mountain, Life Lessons from My Grandfather, Nelson Mandela. In Kabul, Afghanistan, we have Muzammal Shinwari. He's a candidate in the upcoming parliamentary elections of the Afghanistan government, the upcoming next government, but he also has the honor of being one of the youngest Director General, Deputy Minister and Acting Minister in the Afghan government. He grew up as a refugee in Pakistan, but in the last decade, he has represented Afghanistan in negotiating many international trade deals. In Washington, D.C., we have Nasreen Mohammed Ali. She is from Kenya, and Nasreen is the founder of a microcredit enterprise called Cherehani Africa. And this is a social enterprise that empowers women through financial education and microcredit. In just 3 years, her organization has in fact helped more than 3,000 young women and girls set up their own micro-enterprises. Next up is Ayman Abdurrahman, a Tunisian journalist and media developer. In 2011, Ayman co-founded iWatch, an anti-corruption watchdog, which in only 2 years became the local chapter for Transparency International. And last but not the least, Rudan Boleh, a Kurdish American. Rudan represented Iraq as a delegate at the UN Human Rights Summit in New York this year. Welcome, everyone, and I really appreciate that all of you have joined us here today. I'm looking forward to a very exciting conversation. So let's first start talking about something that's most important in anybody's life, no matter where you live, what kind of a lifestyle you have. Everybody needs and wants a decent job. But the fact is that in Asia and Africa, young people actually face higher than average unemployment rates. And before we talk with our panel about the possible reasons for this and also solutions, I want you to hear what some young people that we spoke to in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Kurdish regions of Syria and Iraq had to say about their economic prospects. Let's take a look.
It is tough, hard, and very difficult for young people in Afghanistan to find a job, because the youth unemployment rate is increasing day by day.
It is difficult for young people to find a job because the population in our country is increasing and the government is not providing a real platform for those people, those unemployed people, so it is really hard.
As a young person, I want to work. I don't want to be a burden to my family. I want to take care of myself and I want to help my family. I want to contribute economically.
It's very difficult for young people to find a job because we know better that there is no factories.
To live comfortably, if you talk about the current days, you have to do almost around 2 jobs at a time. Like, one should be a permanent job, and secondly, you have to work part-time as well if you want to fully satisfy your needs.
Unemployment, it has really led to the social devastation of this country.
And throughout the show, we'll hear from these young people a couple more times. But for now, Ndaba, I want to start this conversation with you. This year marks the 42nd anniversary of the Soweto uprising, which was basically the struggle against the apartheid system in South Africa. The idea was that we want to fight for equal opportunity. It's been 42 years. A lot has been achieved, but still a lot more has to be done. South Africa still has a huge problem of lack of literacy, lack of job opportunities for people, and this is something that's common in other parts of the world as well. Where do you feel the mark was missed?
Well, you see, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of progress in terms of young people being able to get education. But when you look at the majority of rural areas, they are still struggling in terms of resources and in terms of giving young people the adequate skills in order for them to find jobs. Not only is there youth unemployment, but there are also unemployable youth because they don't have the necessary skills in order to find jobs. So this is why we work through our foundation in order to give young people skills in technology and entrepreneurship. For us, these are the two sort of key areas, obviously with agriculture as well, that will be able to enable young people to really progress and break the cycle of poverty that exists.
Mm-hmm. So there's a skill gap and there's an education gap. I want to ask my panel here in Washington, D.C., because all of you have also experienced these kind of challenges. Tell me a little bit, Eamon, in terms of that skill gap, your own experience, and then since you are a media developer, what have you learned from that experience? How can that skill gap be bridged?
Well, from a personal experience, I had to begin my experience with work at an early age to assist my studies in the first place. And I actually had to drop out from school, from my grad school in order to work. Because basically in Tunisia at that time, you'd study to get a good job. But it was kind of obvious that you can only get a good job if you know how to get it. But the studies were not really relevant most of the time. So I actually personally have studied English language and literature, but I ended up working mostly in the domain of media and journalism. So my very personal experience tells me that it's not what you study definitely going to be your field of work necessarily, because as Daba has just mentioned, it is a struggle as well for businessmen and for business owners to find the suitable employees for their businesses, because our educational system, at least in my country and in the region vastly, is not necessarily preparing students and young people to immerse themselves in the workforce right away after graduation.
I see both of you ladies are nodding. Rudan, what do you want to say?
I can definitely relate to the Tunisia situation. It's also in addition to there not being a lack of experts and training for young people. The businesses are just not sustainable. So it's not just that business people are not finding the right employers or employees. It's also that there's just the business owners themselves aren't sustaining their businesses, because it's very, in Iraq, there's a huge focus on quick money, quick profit. So oftentimes in Iraq you'll see restaurants, hotels being opened up that 2 years later are shut down because they're just not looking at long-term oriented goals. And of course that a lot has to do with the situation with the violent extremism, as well as lack of education.
But starting a business is hard anywhere in the world. I mean, if you look at data, it shows that about 90 to 95% of businesses fail in the first 3 to 5 years. So sustaining them is hard pretty much anywhere. But Nasreen, you started your own business in a way. It's your own enterprise. Tell us about that experience.
I did, and it wasn't an easy one. And this is the reason it's important for me to work with these women who have the skill, who have the talent, and are very ambitious, but just don't have access to opportunities, don't have the right access to the skills they need to keep the businesses running. So back in Kenya, I work with women and girls in rural and underserved markets. Most of them are dropouts. Most of them have been discriminated from the corporate world, and the best option is to start the business. So they do have a skill in maybe tailoring or firming or owning a shop or hairdressing, but how do they manage the business? I have the skill, but I need to know how to keep this sustainable. I need to know how to reach new and greater markets. So for me, I think watching my mom not have such education. So my mom didn't have access to formal education to a degree level. And she's very determined. She's tried a couple of different businesses, but nothing was sustainable. I mean, she was not able to build this empire that she keeps talking about all the time. And for me, it has been challenging. And as a woman, I do face a lot of discrimination. I face a lot of inequality. I mean, the gender gap is huge in Africa, as it is everywhere else. And if you and I can face such discrimination with our formal education, can you imagine what happens to those women in rural and underserved markets who have no access to financial literacy or business management skills?
And it makes life even more difficult if you're in a war zone. And we have Muzammil in Kabul with us, Muzammil Shinwari. Muzammil, I want to ask you, you're in a very unique position because not only is this a country that's developing, it's part of Asia, has a huge youth bulge, but it's a war zone. When somebody looks at a war zone, how can they look at it as an opportunity zone for young people?
Thank you. Pleasure being with all of you. Afghanistan is facing these crises for 4 decades, and we call it Afghanistan is a rich country, but it's poor. Rich in terms of we have lots of mineral resources, we have young population, which is the more than 65% of our population there below 25 years of age. It is also an opportunity, but it's also a threat, because if we are not able to provide the job opportunities for them, so automatically they will be diverting toward insurgencies and all those things. So there is a kind of relationship between the insurgencies and unemployment. So this is one thing. The opportunities becoming here because it's the new country, especially after 2001. It needs a lot of work inside the country. Whatever you produce, whatever business you start, you will do a lot in it, and you will be successful in it. But at the same time, challenges we are facing because electricity, without having electricity, you cannot produce at a good price that you can compete in the market. And then you are having all those neighbors that they, in terms of the industries, they're quite rich. So competing with them, and then the market is quite a big 30 million people inside Afghanistan, but still because of the raw material we have young population. But the only thing which lack here is about the skill development. We don't have, as Mr. Nadaba mentioned, there are 2 kinds of people. One is the unemployed, and the other the unemployable people. We are also facing this problem that we have many people that they're unemployable because they are lacking those skills which is required for the overall businesses inside countries. We have so many experts coming from outside working in sectors which supposed to be filled by Afghan nationals, but that is the problem, especially a country which suffered for 4 decades the war, and after that you cannot expect that these Afghan, the younger generation, they will fill all those positions. But the hope is there that the younger generation, especially after 2001 onward, the education level is increasing, the school, the children that they are attending school, it's around 11 million people, they are going to universities early morning. You can see it that people are going to university 6 a.m. till 9, that they can study, but at the same time after 9
there
they
is
can
a lot
work.
of drive. I mean, wherever they find opportunities, they want to excel. There is drive. At this moment, I want to take the opportunity to introduce one more guest who has fortunately now joined us in Peshawar, Kabul. We have Maria Turpakai, a star squash player from Pakistan, who for the first several years of her life had to disguise herself as a boy just so she could play sports. Hailing from the tribal region along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, today Maria is empowering other women and girls through her health and fitness programs. Maria, thank you very much for joining us. I'm glad you were able to make it. I want to ask you, we were talking about skill development, we're talking about opportunities, and I want to go a little bit more into that. But for you, you chose sports. And a lot of young people do want to come into sports, but their families don't really see this as a viable career. It's not even seen as an opportunity worth pursuing. What was that experience like? And for all of those people who maybe want to build a career in that, what kind of a path would you say they should take?
First of all, thank you for having me here. I would say I did not choose sports. Sports chose me, and I ended up in sports accidentally. And I was very young, in tribal areas when I realized that, boys have very different rights than girls. And girls do not have any right to decide about their lives. And that's, when I burnt my girly dresses and cut my hair. And I was very fortunate and very blessed that my father, he gave me name Genghis Khan that day. So from that day on, I was raised, as Genghis Khan. Mm-hmm. So that name and that behavior, the boyish, the strength that I had, and the get-up I had, nobody could guess that I was a girl. So I was very lucky that I was able to explore the area more than any other girl could ever do. And I was a fighter from a very young age. I was always found in the middle of fights and bruised and bleeding. That was the time when we moved to Peshawar, and it was after 9/11, after some time, and there were a lot of things happening in the tribal areas too. Tribal areas were always tribal areas because we didn't have any sports or education or any kind of facilities or healthcare facilities. The only culture we had was gun culture and drug culture. Mm-hmm. And people were living in Stone Age, and with a very old old kind of mentality. Mm-hmm. But other than that, moving to Peshawar, and then my father realized that to channelize my energy into a positive way, mm-hmm. because I was always found in the middle of fights. I was very aggressive and strong child. Mm-hmm. So I ended up in sports, and the first sport that I joined was weightlifting. Mm-hmm. I joined it with the name of Genghis Khan, and I got second position in all over Pakistan boys championship.
So basically you pursued your passion, but you had to change your identity for that.
In Pakistan, and we had many world champions from here.
Right. So basically Maria was able to pursue her passion, but she had to give up her identity for that. And
it's something that,
I think I want to move to Nasreen here, because Nasreen, that kind of speaks into your experience as well. When you go and talk to other women about starting their own business, what kind of a reaction do you see from them and from society at large?
Well, they're ready. Mm-hmm. The women out there are ready, but initially the challenge was, were the men ready to allow them to take up these positions? Mm-hmm. A lot of men felt very intimidated, and we did have cases where we're trying to support a woman to start her business. She had the skills, she had the ambition, but her husband would not allow that. So, I mean, this is a dialogue it's a domestic dialogue. Mm-hmm. How do we get involved in that? So what we've done is we've taken the time to now educate this man that, okay, if your woman is out there, if she's educated, if she's running her own business, she brings back at least 90% of her income back to the house. She's taking care of you, your children, and the entire household. Mm-hmm. So,
all right. And at this moment, I would like to invite our audience to ask a question. We have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes. Looking at this dialogue, it's really fantastic. What do you think would be the premium opportunities for youth throughout all these different countries so they can actually contribute to themselves, to their families, but also their country?
All right. So the question is about what kind of opportunities can be created to make youth, to give them a chance to contribute to the development of their countries. Daba, I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about this, because this theme of having the lack of skills and lack of right type of education that could prepare you for the job market, that has been echoing in this conversation a lot. So looking forward, thinking forward, what do you see can be done?
Hello?
Tabak, were you able to hear my question? I think we may be having some audio problems, but Rudan, I want to start with you on this one, because you have started a successful career over here as well. But when you look at the larger problem of skill development and creating opportunities, where do you see the room?
I definitely think that the first change that needs to be made in order to create more opportunities is education. I think Iraq has failed its youth with a bad education system. Not only that, the older generation in Iraq doesn't support the younger generation. There's a lot of tension between the two generations. They don't trust each other. The older people have a different mentality. Younger people are more progressive, they're more forward-thinking, they're just not given the platform. So what I would say is provide them that platform, require that jobs create something as simple as an internship program so that young people can get involved. Exchange programs. Most of it will have to do with motivating young people to do it, and the motivation doesn't really come from the older generation. So young people in Iraq definitely have to work together, and the passion is there, the empowerment is not.
Eamon, did you want to add to it before I go to the next question?
I would definitely second that. In my country and in other countries in the region, I would say we have failed massively to create any tangible reform in education which would lead to a better economic status for our countries, since we are preparing students for jobs that have already expired or vanished from existence, and the jobs that we have right now require a different mindset, a different training, a different preparation that our schools are not offering, our universities are not competing enough, and it's really a miracle whenever I see people from my region, from my country, going to universities abroad, competing with people who've been to big universities and colleges worldwide, because if people here know how little people get in their universities and in the schools back home, in Tunisia at least, I would guarantee that it would be astonishing that this person could actually take it on himself.
It to where they did.
Yeah, absolutely, and took it on himself or herself to train it, to reach that point that he can now compete with students from the US, from the UK,
from
and
other parts
else.
of the world that have a lot more opportunities.
I also just wanted to add, it's all because the youth have gone and suffered through so much. They've seen their parents suffer. It's just trickled down generation-wise. So the more suffering you see, the more you want to do something about it. And that's why we see that passion amongst North African youth, Middle Eastern youth. Definitely.
All right. So at this point, let's take a question from our live audience.
Yes. The question to the participants, you have passions and energies. Do you see your governments formulating policies that harness your energies and passions and ideas that you want to take forward? Is there any indication that the governments are doing something for that?
All right, Nasreen, let's start with you.
I will say the government has put in the effort to try and empower the youth, but they're not involving us in formulating the programs and the initiatives. So sometimes some of these programs I feel do not understand what exactly our needs are or what our vision is, where do we want to go with this. And most of the programs are formulated by leaders who've been in position for a while. They don't come back and check with us that, is this going to work for you? Is this going to work with the vision that you have?
So there's a gender gap, but there's also an age gap, and in that, a lot of the ideas kind of fall through those cracks. Now, one of the concerns regarding youth is that if they're not able to harness their potential, they will become targets, easy targets, in fact, for extremist groups that not only offer them a sense of purpose, but quite frankly, money, just chances at a better future. Before we talk about, what can be done to keep youth maybe on the positive track, away from these kind of influences, I want you to hear what some young people that we spoke to on the streets in different countries had to say about this.
Terrorism has so negatively affected my country, probably more than anywhere else in the world. But what concerns me most is that my fellow citizens are not as concerned about terrorism.
Unemployment is one of the greatest or the biggest cause for terrorism in this country, and we witnessed that since decades.
The reason for the uprise in terrorist groups in the Middle East is because of concepts like religion, justice, and other things. The uprising of ISIS was the result of unfairness within the Iraqi army, the sectarian Shiite policy against the Sunnis, and the Sunni-Shiite conflict in general. ISIS is the result of a false explanation of religions.
As a young generation in this world, We must resolve this. It should be resolved by young generation.
Maria, we all heard what some of the young people that we spoke to had to say about the issue of extremism. Your life was actually turned upside down because of extremist ideologies. You were forbidden from playing, and for 3 years you locked yourself up in your house and you practiced squash at home. What I want to ask you is, so many years have gone by. What kind of a change have you seen in that mentality? Is extremism something that is even more pervasive, it's growing more where you are, or have you seen some kind of positive changes as well?
Well, I would say that definitely positive things I've seen, and you know, there was a time when I started playing and I was the only one, and now today I see around 27 girls playing squash. And I see in many other sports, girls are coming up, you know, whether it's athletics or swimming or boxing, you know, such sports that you can't think of. And parents are actually, you know, they feel that, you know, their girls should be playing sports. So I would say that extremism and terrorism is something that I strongly believe can be tackled by, you know, by sports. Mm-hmm. And education is definitely very important. You can't just think of only education, but I think sports and education go along well. And especially for the developing world, you know, where our youth, 70% youth is jobless, and, you know, they don't have, you know, opportunities. And I don't actually also agree with the education system in our countries, and my country, I would say in Pakistan, which is, I think that, you know, most of the schools are ghost schools, or it's not properly functional, and the teachers are not well educated, I would say, themselves, and the system also does not teach the kid to how to think and how to think, and they lose their creativity, and a lot of kids end up, you know, outside you know, because we have a lot of guns and we have a lot of drugs in our, you know, in our rural areas and tribal areas. So I think this is also becoming a hotbed for the terrorists and Taliban. Mm-hmm. So I think the responsibility goes to the government, and I always, you know, I feel very, you know, it's a very sad situation that government is not paying attention to, you know, to giving proper facilities to the young youth so they can get quality education, which has, you know, which is very humanitarian,
necessary for them,
humanity-based education.
It will give them the tools to succeed in life.
Sports are very important.
So, Daba, I want to ask you, when we talk about violence, and extremism particularly, it's not always just driven by religious reasons. I mean, there are political reasons, racial reasons, and in South Africa, there's also a history of far-right movements, which now we're seeing in Europe and in other parts of like Germany. We've seen this in Poland and also in Austria. But speaking from your experience, how do you then create an environment? And especially when you see that the governments are not doing what needs to be done, how do young people, their foundations, create those opportunities where youth can be taken away from the message that attracts them when it comes to them from extremist mindset?
Well, you know, one thing that people obviously need to know is that young people need to be young people to be able to express themselves. You know, when you look at majority of Africa, majority of the young people actually live in rural areas, right? And so in the rural areas, being the most poor areas, they do not have opportunity to engage in recreational activities. Here in the developed world, kids are able to, you know, take up computer class, basketball, they're able to go bowling, they're able to go watch movies. So in these areas, they don't have these opportunities to play sports, etc. And so what ends up happening is that they engage in, you know, social ills such as alcoholism abuse, drug abuse, and of course a lot of sex, and you get a lot of teen pregnancy. So we need to be able to provide kids with the essential tools to become kids, right? To be able to understand and educate themselves in the things they're interested in, whether they want to produce movies or they want to produce music. They don't have these opportunities.
So if they have an outlet, basically if they have a healthy outlet then they may not turn towards unhealthy activities. This town hall today that we're doing, Thinking Forward, it also being broadcast on Facebook, and not only on Voice of America's main English language page, but also on several language services pages. So if you're from different parts of the world, you can join your own Facebook page right now and watch this over there and share your thoughts and your comments, not just with us, but also with people from your own countries. At this point, I want to take a couple of comments that we have received through our social media. And this one is about extremism. I have it right here in front of me. It's Manumna Emmanuel says that mostly extremism is because of a lack of Western education, because 70% of young people involved in terror are illiterate and lack proper orientation. I want to ask my panelists in DC, is this an Eastern-Western divide? Is it because of a lack of Western education? Eamon?
Well, it's a very tricky question, given the fact that one of the militant groups in my continent is actually called Boko Haram, which stands for Western education is
it's forbidden, it's
forbidden,
haram,
it's
un-Islamic.
haram. So it's kind of funny to draw that link, which I don't necessarily agree with, because at least the Middle East has been a cradle and has been a very welcoming environment for sciences, for philosophy, for knowledge in general, but not at the current moment. This has been the case a couple of centuries ago, not very long ago, but it's very unfortunate that nowadays, with the the discovery of petroleum resources and all these natural resources, which are like turning to be kind of a curse on the people of these regions, that education is not having, and science and knowledge are not having as much attention, as much funding as they used to have before. So I don't think it's Western versus Eastern, but it's rather the current situation has pushed people away from focusing on these. And I hear it a lot in my community saying it's not the right moment to discuss this. It's not the right moment to discuss harassment, because now we have to focus on economic situation. So it's never not the right time. It's any time is a good time for any topic that really touches upon our lives.
When we talk about, it could be Western education, or it could be, this cultural divide. One of the issues that then arises is that you are basically creating a divide between people who live in one part of the world or another part of the world. But when you look at young people, overall their challenges and their concerns are pretty similar. And I know, Radan, you have actually worked in bringing people together and helping them understand each other. Tell us about that experience, and how can the benefits of that be felt by the next group of people who could be coming of age in the next couple of years?
So being in Iraq, I lived there for 2 years, and right away what I noticed amongst the student communities on campus was that there's a lot of animosity and tension between the different ethnic and religious groups. And Iraq is an extremely diverse area. You have Kurdish Muslims, you have Kurdish Yazidis, you have Assyrians, Muslims as well. So what I did is I co-launched an organization called Student Ambassadors for Peace to just promote intercultural understanding. So we would hold workshops, but we would do something as simple as conduct a peace or tolerance walk. More than 300 students attended when we had that peace walk, and it really did, you might not think so, but it really did change the attitude amongst students. And so that's really where it starts. I started it at a university. It should start with education. In Iraq right now, the only religion that's being taught is Islam. But why are we doing that if there's couple other religions within the country? So that's one major issue. Then there's also a little anecdote I would like to share from when I was in Iraq. I had a Yazidi friend sitting next to me in the car when I was in Duhok, which is the city where I'm from, and we got to border security, and the security guard asked for our IDs. And the way IDs work in Iraq is they have your ethnicity and your religion stated on there. So mine stated Kurdish Muslim. My friend stated Kurdish Yazidi. So the security guard kind of leans over and whispers, "Do you know the person with you is Yazidi?" as if it's the biggest crime to be sitting with someone or hanging out with someone of a different religion. Why did he ask me that? There's clearly a lack of training on prejudice, on just not being racially segregating each other. Same thing goes for education. Had that security guard been taught from a young age that other religions are not bad, and here, let's not just learn Islam, let's learn what Yazidism is about, let's learn about Christianity. That's going to open the eyes of young people, because the person sitting next to you doesn't practice your religion. So it's definitely changing the attitudes and the tension amongst these young people.
If you want to add something, because then I want to ask Muzammil a question about this.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of this concept of East versus West, I think it is problematic when the continuity of the colonialist dynamic between the former colonies and their the monopole or the countries that used to rule them. It's when certain countries still enforce their languages to be taught in other countries, they still enforce, they invest in developing and improving, for instance, in my country, it's the French language, which is kind of dying everywhere in the continent, but we are still receiving funding. We're still having a very large French presence in Tunisia and mostly in North Africa, to continue the kind of the French hegemony over the region, which is not doing much for the host countries, which is not doing much for the people of my generation, because French is not now the language of the world trade, it's not the language of the world cooperation. It keeps us like as if sort of isolated and only in direct need and dependency.
Dependence on one country.
On one
particular
exactly.
country. Muzammil, I want to bring you into this conversation. I mean, right now, a major part of Afghanistan's economy is just being held through international aid. It's basically a war economy right now. And the concern is that once international forces leave, there could be a situation where, again, the economy could be in dire trouble, and you could see a rise in extremism and in elements that are not conducive to the progress of a country. Now, we see the Taliban and now even Daesh seem to have an unending supply in Afghanistan. What kind of a future do you see in this situation for your people?
One thing we saw, especially when we talk about from 2001 till 2014, our growth was double-digit growth, economic growth. But after the withdrawal of international forces, mainly around 150,000 international forces, they left. We faced some crisis because some of the people that they were employed with them, they lost their jobs and the overall fund was coming. And the overall donor support is also decreasing. So now it is coming to the natural way of the economic development. So that's something is doing. Afghanistan, as I mentioned at the beginning, that it's, of course, it's an LDC country, but we are quite rich in terms of mineral resources. We have gas, we have oil, we have all kind of mineral resources inside the country. The government and the future government, and especially the responsibility of the younger generation, is to focus on that, acquire those skills that is needed for the development of these mineral resources. It will not only help the country to improve economically, but at the same time, it will create massive jobs inside the country, and that will automatically help those problems. The government currently, they are in a peace negotiation with Taliban. Hopefully there will be some positive result in that. So I think the government currently, they're working on that area, but at the same time, for the future and for the younger generation, I think the job creation, we heard about the education level, Eastern or Western. It doesn't matter. What does matter is education. The education should be there. The literacy rate is quite low in Afghanistan. I think it needs to be worked on. The quality of the education, especially in the rural areas, it needs to be improved. The private education lately started, but I think it's a good addition to that. So once we have the quality education, then we have the youth with skill. There are some donors that are contributing to the skill development inside Afghanistan. So once we have the quality education, then we have skill development. At the same time, we have enough mineral resources. So I think all those can contribute to the future development of the country.
There are opportunities,
and I think
they
one
just
of
have
the
to
major
come together
that
at the right time. At this point, I want to take a question from the floor because we have a live audience here too, and in the spirit of the true town hall, let's hear what this question is.
Hello. This question is to Mr. Mandela. You mentioned that kids in South Africa, in rural areas in South Africa, need to be kids. Have there been any existing programs or developing projects dedicated to this mission? Thank you.
Hi. Yes, well, I work at the Africa Rising Foundation, which we started back in 2010. And our work has, primarily been focused in the rural areas. And we work in education, technology, entrepreneurship development, and celebrating African culture, because we see ourselves as a catalyst in creating a new generation of African leaders who will empower themselves to be at the forefront of Africa's development. We have just completed a 3-month computer programming course for 60 youth. 40 of those were in high school and the other 20 were unemployed youth. And it was really an amazing program where kids, after 3 months, wrote an exam with Oracle, who is a software company, and then were able then to get a certificate. And once they get a certificate, we then assist them to get jobs in the related areas. Of course, computer program takes a while, so this was really just the first level of them being able to get a certificate and move on to the second level. We also have an agricultural program. As you know, agriculture is one of the biggest ways in which young people can get involved. But unfortunately, young people in today's world, when you talk about the picture of success, they don't see themselves wearing a working suit and rain boots. When you talk about the picture of success to young people, they see themselves wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, and going into an air-conditioned building. So now we're trying to teach young people and promote agriculture's business to say, you can make just as much money, doing bee farming or doing, farming and growing crops or, nuts or fruits, etc., right? And not necessarily going to this office. So it's also a lot of the time that young people don't have the information. They don't have access to information in order to empower themselves. And that's why they always, running to go into the cities, and it becomes a huge problem with this migration that's taking place. We need to give young people access to information so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. We also do career guidance. So this year we actually had the National Youth Development Agency talking about the career opportunities. We got the Nedbank Foundation involved. We got the Department of Tourism involved. We even had the National Air Force involved, coming to young people in high school, teaching about the different career opportunities that exist in these different institutions. So those are the things that young people need to have access to have information. That's why the internet is so important. But as you know, in the rural areas, people don't have internet. They don't have computers, and majority of kids in rural areas actually finish high school without even touching a computer. So how are we going to compete on a global level when our kids don't have sound knowledge of technology? So those are the kinds of programs that we bring to our kids in the rural areas.
All right. So as we saw, young people are full of bright ideas. They know the problems. They also have ideas about solutions. But then the question is anyone listening? People who are in power, people who get to make policies, are they paying any attention or not? And when we actually look at political engagement as far as young people are concerned, the fact is that the average age of parliamentarians around the world is about 53. So when we talk about young people and trying to get their voices heard, before we talk about how this can actually be made a reality, a possibility, let's hear what some young people in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Kurdish regions of Syria and Iraq told us about what they think of politics and politicians.
I think that what we need right now is not someone that's old and wise. We need someone ambitious, someone who has a lot of ideas that can motivate young people around us.
I don't trust the political parties at all, because in Pakistan, every party promises that if we win elections, we'll do this and that for you, but they don't fulfill campaign promises.
I'm 18 years old and they don't care about my needs. They just care about their own businesses, and they just want to live for their own self, not for those people. But actually, these things happen, but they don't care about us.
It is very easy to sit or walk in the streets and around and judge this country's political system. But actually, in reality, if you look at the 4 decades of war that this country has been through, it is really difficult to bring stability that easy to this country.
if a leader of a country can be a young person, it can bring modernization in a country, and it can facilitate many things that a young generation wants.
Older elected officials think they know better and have enough experience to serve the society. However, I think young people can handle their issues much better.
Younger people can handle their issues much better. That's why we have young people here today. Iman, I want to ask you this question. At the beginning of the program, we talked about the Soweto uprising in South Africa. And fast forward to 2011, the Arab Spring literally was sparked in Tunisia when a young man set himself on fire because he was desperate and sick and tired of the lack of opportunities that he had. Since that time, we have seen street action, but very little has translated into actual policy changes. Is street action, street power enough?
It is powerful, and I've been honored to be part of it for years in Tunisia, and the results, unfortunately, do not come straight away. They don't manifest themselves as soon as we want them to do, unfortunately. And that's what creates a frustration, and that's what makes people lose hope sometimes. Unfortunately, these are the rules of the game, and solutions and better situations do not fall from the skies. We have to fight for them. We have to continuously fetch them, and that's what we are doing, and that's what's happening at least in Tunisia and in other neighboring countries. What should be done better, in my opinion, is that people who have been fortunate enough to see better examples, who have had the chance to travel, because this is one thing probably we haven't spoke about until now, and it is the restriction on mobility of young people. People maybe in the developed world don't know much about the concept of visas, don't know much about the lines and the months of waiting in front of foreign embassies, and it's like sort of humiliating, and it creates that first dynamic of whether you like that country or not, whether you are have a positive impression of its people or not. If you are humiliated, if you are staying in lines for days and for weeks and for months sometimes under the rain and under the sun to get a simple paper that will allow you to get into another country. So just to go back to your question, people who had the chance to see better examples, to see how a functioning system like here, like in most developing countries, can bring back that knowledge, can transfer this know-how, and they can help people back home replicate and adapt it to the local culture context and make it work so that...
And the interesting thing also is that in countries in Asia and Africa, young people actually tend to vote in larger numbers. They're more politically active in a lot of those countries compared to Western democracies. Muzammil, I want to ask you this question. You heard what a lot of young people, in fact, had to say about politicians. They don't really trust them. What got you interested in politics, and what does it feel like when you hear that young people don't trust people like you?
Traditional politician, and that's why the place camp that the younger generation should step in. What I experienced, especially looking to Afghanistan government, the two government, President Karzai's and currently President Ghani's government, I think the younger generation, they were given opportunities. Like myself, I started and I raised through the rank quite quickly. But going to the parliament, because parliament is one of the institutions that you need qualified people, you need younger generation. For a country where the population of more than 65% or younger generation, I think that is needed. So that's why the hope of these people, or those people that they're expecting the new generation to bring change. And I think with that, many things will change. And once you have a strong parliament, so you can have strong monitoring system, you can have strong, you can develop laws which can help the younger generation, especially the ordinary people. So I think they are fed up with the traditional politician. They're fed up with those people that they were involved in in the 4 decades of war, killing each other, whatever it happened. So they don't want those people. So that's why when you see to Afghanistan future election, which is supposed to be held on 20th October, around 80% of the candidate, they might be below 35 years. So that is a big number, and we are expecting that a huge number, and I'm quite hopeful that majority of the next Afghan parliament will be the younger generation, that they will be below 35 years of age. So I think that will contribute a lot to help those problems that is faced by the younger generation right now.
And change the perception of politics and politicians. At this point, I want to take a question from our live audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you. As a young professional from Africa, I would like to know what you suggest others like me focus on and take on ourselves to address first, as there are a lot of issues and obstacles on a social level, economic level, and political level. Thank you.
Ms. Rain, I want you to take that question.
Thank you. While the two gentlemen were talking, I was just thinking about how in Kenya the youth blindly engage in politically instigated violence after a small bribe. And this is probably in support of, empty promises, in support of what their leaders have promised them to deliver. And personally, I encourage the youth to, take initiative, go out there and, believe in yourself, believe in what you can do, and take action. You cannot always depend on the government or blame the government for not having certain opportunities. The opportunities are there, and yes, it is true, sometimes the market is not ready for skilled youth. The market may not be ready for us, but then what do you do with that? If you have the skill and you can do something with it, go out there and create it. Partner with other youth, partner with other individuals with the same vision. I saw something very exciting in the last 6 weeks while I participated in the Mandela Washington Fellowship. And the young African leaders, I was with 25 other African leaders, and it's incredible. We all have great opportunities. We all have this vision of making our countries better, and we know we can work together. But there are all these barriers that our governments place that, okay, you cannot work with South Sudan. We're having these political issues. Let's not get involved in that. Mm-hmm. If you can make it better, work together regardless of what the political situation is.
So in a way, don't get involved in bad politics, but still be politically active. I do want to take this moment right now to actually go to some viewers in Bangladesh, because this town hall is being viewed by people around the globe and they want to ask a question. So I would like to welcome our viewers in Bangladesh right now. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, so the average UN age for parliamentary candidacy is like 53, which is really so high in terms of young generation of today's world. So how do you think that the younger generation of 30s or below 40s could really come forward with what support from the government and other stakeholders in the field, that what support they could provide to the young people to come forward for the parliamentary candidacy to uphold their democratic rights and speak up and then go into the parliament?
Eamon, were you able to catch that question?
Sort of.
Okay, all right. I was also having some trouble understanding what they were saying, but I think one of the points that they were raising was because the average age of parliamentarians, is about 53. What can younger leaders bring to the table if we take the question from that angle? What is it that you feel younger leaders can do that the older generation has not done or cannot do?
It's absolutely innovation that younger generations can bring to the table, can bring to the political game in general in our region. It's not, I would agree definitely with what you just said, but I also would still blame the governments in our region, because not only that they are not empowering youth, but they are also disempowering citizenship in general. So I would like one day, it's my kind of dream, to have young people's opinions respected as senior citizens, and we won't even talk about whether being young or old, because I would evaluate the ideas and the plans on the basis of doability and how good they are for the nation, for the country, not whether they come from young people or older citizen. Because mostly in my country until like 7 years ago, before the revolution, no one's opinions mattered. Whether you're young, you're old, you are worthless because you're not part of the ruling party, you are not part of the 1% that rules the country, that acquires all the wealth, that appears on TV, even appearance on television. I actually come from the town where that misfortunate young man set himself on fire, and that's how the country entered into a revolution, entered into this large demand of change of norms and change of powers. People in my region wouldn't have dreamt of seeing one of them being on TV, let alone being on international TV. So and that in itself is like revolutionary.
This theme of not being heard, I've also seen this actually being echoed right now on our social media as well. And I want to read a couple of comments to our viewers around the globe right now. Dashti Abdullah says, most politicians in the Middle East do not want individuals and the society to be intellectuals or to be aware of their rights. They want to lead an uneducated society. And Kamal Aslan says, the problems that youth faces in Turkey is that we don't understand them and don't respect their opinions. We raise them so they would fit what society demands them to be. We raise them to obey. So you can get yourself heard on the streets, sure. But how do you translate that into action without being part of the political process? Rodan.
I would say with the problem with Iraq, I just want to start with saying that in order to actually hear your voice at the table, the older politicians need to provide a seat for young people at the table, and that's not what they're doing. So like we kind of talked about earlier, young people need to take it into their own hands. But really the greatest favor that older politicians can do for young people in Iraq is take a step back, allow young people to take over, because clearly the older politicians weren't successful enough in doing so. We need to allow young people to speak up. We need to have just as simple as having a minister of education be perhaps younger than 30 years old. That just to see how that would play out, what kind of changes that would make. So young people definitely have to fight for it themselves. The power comes from youth, so they definitely need to, in Iraq, in my opinion, they need to start demanding their voices to be heard. And
Even quickly add something, because I want to get Muzammil's take on this, because he's a young politician.
I think there is a special place in hell for for young people who don't support young people in our parliament, in our governments, because we have some of these people, but they tend to keep their mouths shut once they reach that position.
Right.
And that's what makes us look bad.
Right.
And they set a bad example for young people. Like once they get the position, they do nothing, and that gives an excuse for older generations to say, well, he got the position, but he didn't do anything good with it.
We do also have to remember, though, who are those young people that are being hired by these politicians? Because in Iraq, we have a huge problem of corruption, particularly nepotism. So if you don't have a rich, wealthy politician, uncle or father, then you have very little to no chance of actually getting involved in politics. So if you do see young people speaking up in parliament, or not speaking up, but still being in that position, then you know that this is a result of corruption. It's a result of a corrupt system. So you actually end up questioning
their motives as well of why they are actually speaking up.
Because you need to look into how did they get there in the first place. Is it based on merit? And most of the time it's not.
Right. Muzammil, I want to ask you, and if you can briefly answer this question. Young people can bring innovation to leadership, but there's also this issue of inexperience. How do you overcome that problem?
You know, there is one thing that the young people, they have the energy, they have the modern education or the latest education, they have the will to bring changes. They're progressive and they think about the positive changes and they want to have a rapid thing. The older generation, they are more happy with the status quo. They said, don't bother yourself, just things will move on. So yes, that inexperience can be just replaced with quality education that they're having in the amount that the energy that they can spend on it. So with the passage of time, they can improve. The other other issue here, for example, in our parliament, in our political system, most of the warlords, they're part of the parliament, they don't care about anything else, just to keep themselves, aside from all other problems. So that's why the younger generation, they're stepping in because they say, we want a progressive Afghanistan here in Afghanistan.
Right.
So that's why we need to bring changes. And that political will doesn't exist in the older generation that we are having right now.
And that is something that young people can bring. So if any one of you is wondering why Voice of America is doing this town hall, I have just the person here for you who can answer that question. Voice of America Director Amanda Bennett. Amanda, if you can please tell all our viewers spread around the globe, why are we doing this?
Well, I think you can hear from the answers in the talk that you're having here exactly why we're doing it, because what I hear is there's nothing more powerful in the world than knowledge and ideas. And Voice of America gives a free access to real ideas, positive ideas, negative ideas, and knowledge. And so for each one of you are saying that the thing that your countries need is for other people in those countries to see themselves as having a possibility, to see a place where something does work or have an idea about a different way of operating. And so I think the name of this session is Young Leaders, and I would have to say that I both envy you and I don't envy you in a way, because you have a heavy, heavy burden. It's a heroic burden. And a heroic burden is that you've had the intelligence, the drive, the luck, the opportunity to get where you are. Now you've got the responsibility not only to reach back and bring individuals along with you, but to think about how you're going to affect the system. That is a huge burden. The difficulties are enormous, but I like to think of it about the burden that a hero would have.
All right, thank you very much. That was Voice of America Director Amanda Bennett. And at this point, I want to go one more time to Daba Mandela. Daba, this world is a better place because Nelson Mandela lived among us. As we end this show, I want you to share a lesson from his life that you think the youth can take and run with.
Well, there's a number of lessons that my grandfather taught me, and obviously a lot of us around the world through his books. One of the lessons that he taught us is that in order to defeat your enemy, you need to work with your enemy, because then he becomes your partner. Another lesson he taught us is that love is much stronger than hate. If a person can be taught to hate, a person can be taught to love, because love comes much more natural to the human condition than hate. And finally, I want to say that we are the masters of our destiny. We therefore have a responsibility, a duty, an obligation to make sure those of us in privileged positions, those of us who are on this panel, need to do as much as we can to come together, to share what we're doing in our communities to empower young people. And, Madiba, for me, was a man who put his life on the line because he believed in good that will always succeed over evil. And we need,
So with those moving words from Nelson Mandela, I would like to end our show today. Thinking Forward was a pleasure for me to be a part of. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists and all of our audience spread around the world. Thank you very much for being a part of this conversation. And with this, I bid you farewell. This is Sarah Zaman, wishing all of you a better tomorrow.